because if we don't do it, somebody else will. And that somebody else is usually some sort of regulatory agency. It may be a government agency, could be some other outside agency that really doesn't understand necessarily what we do. So it's always better to self-regulate. And I mean, it's the right thing to do. I think morally it's the right thing to do, or ethically, depending on how you want to define it. But it allows us as a profession, which is really the definition of a profession, to make sure that what we're doing is the right thing. One, I think it happens organically, but two, we've also been very, very proactive in, encouraging people from diverse backgrounds. And again, remember, diversity is it's a broad term. And so, diversity can have many, many different components. And so I think if you look at the board, one of the areas that's always been diverse is in geographic and institutional diversity. And then as you followed along the way, there's gender diversity that has now come through. We now have, underrepresented minorities who are now board members. So I would say that we are a very proactive group in making sure that we're not only representing our diplomates, but we are also representing our public. For me, having been the exam chair, I actually had been trying to push for some changes with the oral exam. It wasn't necessarily where we ended up. I mean, I wasn't necessarily looking at people's own cases being the basis of their exam, but I felt just based on my experience that we could do things in a different way that in my mind, very, very personally would be better. And inertia is a very powerful thing. And the pandemic did allow for that inertia to be lessened. And once we made the initial change to do a virtual exam, because we had to change how we gave it. We had to change the number of protocols. We had to change how our examiners were assigned for every session. So once you make that first change, subsequent changes, I think people are more open to say, gosh, this change was really not as hard as we thought it might be. And, there are other things coming down the pike, like, AI. And how can those, how can AI and other factors potentially impact what we're doing, either in a positive or a negative way? And I think people became very excited about making further changes. And, Brian Newsombaum's position as our, as our executive director, and his connections with the other executive directors of a lot of the other member boards of ABMS, that kind of helped us to go down the lane of the case-based, people's own cases. Again, it kind of goes back to that definition of a profession. And, everybody tends to use, I think, airline pilots as a good example. You don't want your airline pilot to go get their pilot's license and then never be evaluated as technology changes, as they age, as different things happen over time, and so again, by including longitudinal learning, which is now the definition of continuing certification, then we're going to, again, going back to our mission, that we want to make sure our public knows that if you are a board-certified otolaryngologist moving forward, that they are going to have to meet a minimum bar to continue that certification. And the way it was with the old maintenance of certification, and you could argue it's all semantics, but I think continuing certification is just a better definition. But the old maintenance of certification prior to the name change was a 10-year, Brian is always good at saying it's the 10-year high stakes exam that, it's a one point in time, and then you don't get to do it again until 10 years down the line, and you don't know what has happened in the intervening 10 years. So for us, our diplomates have been, universally positive about the process that we are doing now. I think people, say that they learned from it. It's, if you can say that being tested is fun, I think that people actually enjoy doing it. When you're looking at future scenarios, some of these, obviously who would have predicted a pandemic? So, and I'll just start off by saying that when we first started doing these scenario plannings, probably it's a little hyperbole, but there was a lot of eye rolling, and it's like, I'm not so sure about this. And the consultant that we landed with, they were fantastic. And so by kind of creating an upfront introduction or orientation to these scenarios, I think, everybody was, it's like, okay, now this makes sense. And, we I think it was 4 scenarios that we had. I think that's right. But there certainly was some overlap, but a lot of it had to do with changes in government, governance from just the actual government. What would happen if the government decided to, okay, you're no longer going to be self-regulated, and we're going to regulate you? How would that impact the board? What would happen if all of a sudden, non-physicians were allowed to do the work that we do with different training requirements? And, how would that impact what we do? There were. I can't remember all the details, but it made you, that I have to say, and despite being a little bit of a skeptic at the beginning, it did make you think of things that's like, even though it's extremely unlikely that the specifics of the scenarios would happen, it set the framework for trying to anticipate challenges that we might have down the road. What would happen if there was another world war? How would that impact us? What if hospitals were no longer, they were no longer viable? What if research dollars dried up? And as you're hearing me, most of the scenarios were potentially bad things that could happen. There were a few things that could be positive, but it was more just trying to, how can we make decisions now that will set us up for success with future potential difficult challenges. It's not difficult to keep that at the forefront. You can imagine every meeting we have where the board is together, or even a committee of the board is together, the mission comes up multiple times, and that is the stake in the ground, and so every time we think about doing something that's a significant change or alteration, we have to go back to our mission statement. And, now we're also working on value statements, which we really haven't ever done before. And that's part of the strategic planning. And so these value statements are also going to be guideposts for us. And it's also they're going to be guideposts for the public to see. And so that they can look at the American Board of Otolaryngology Head and Neck Surgery and say, gosh, you know what? This group of professionals is following the right path, because these are their values, and the values look outward, they don't look inward. And I think that's incredibly important. we are looking, how do we help others as opposed to how do we help ourselves?